The Last Word with Lawrence O'Donnell starts right now. I promised you he'd be back. Hey, Lawrence.
Hey, Jen. I saw your coverage of the Kennedy Center situation today, and Senator Sheldon Whitehouse is a member by law of the board of the Kennedy Center. He was in the meeting today where the Trump people on the board, which is the overwhelming majority, voted to get Donald Trump's name engraved on the building, even though it was a federal judge ordering it off, and also voted to close it down. Senator Whitehouse voted against all of those things. He's going to join us. He's going to join us and tell us how that meeting went. And it is something, and it's so crazily childish because we know that it's whatever he does there is going to be erased. There will come a time when there's a Democratic president and all that stuff's going away. And Donald Trump will live to see that day himself in his retirement in Florida. It's going to happen.
No question. It is also the behavior of a very small, insecure man who needs his name in some way in gold letters on a building. I cannot wait to hear what Sheldon Whitehouse has to say about it.
Yeah, he was in the meeting. It's going to be great. He's going to join us later in the hour.
Looking forward to it.
Thanks, Jen.
Thanks, Lawrence.
In the ongoing war that Donald Trump started before his war in Iran, Donald Trump has lost again and lost big. Donald Trump's war on America's oldest university led to another loss for Donald Trump in court today, with a federal judge in Boston dismissing a Trump administration lawsuit against Harvard University for what Donald Trump's lawyers claimed was a violation by Harvard of Title VI of the Civil Rights Act of 1964, a law that Donald Trump didn't care about in 1964 and has never cared about since. Judge Richard Stearns, appointed by President Bill Clinton, dismissed the case, saying the Trump complaint was, quote, devoid of any factual allegations. And so Harvard, once again, shamed Donald Trump in court and, in the process, unfortunately, shames some other universities like Columbia, Cornell, and Brown, who chose to negotiate with Donald Trump instead of fight his unconstitutional and illegal attempts to interfere in the operations of American universities. Every wartime president prior to Donald Trump has spent more time thinking about and often agonizing about the conduct of that war. New York Times reporter Maggie Haberman, who has been covering Donald Trump since long before Donald Trump began his political career, is now the co-author with Jonathan Swan of Regime Change, the nonfiction bestseller of the year, in which they describe the inner workings of the Trump White House and vividly capture what is on Donald Trump's mind. In an interview with Axios today, Maggie Haberman said that 70% of Donald Trump's mind share, as she put it, is on his building of his ballroom and his building other tributes to himself.
You would think that on the 17th day of the war that he would have maps of the Middle East or maps of, troop deployments. Who knows? What he picks up these pictures and it's of maple trees. And he says, I'm choosing maple trees for the White House. I'm good at picking trees. So I'm paraphrasing here, but that's pretty much what he said. Under that were designs of the ballroom. And he starts talking to us about the columns and how some of the columns are, evocative of Rome. And then on the other side, the columns are evocative of Athens. And he's happy that they're a little bit either wider or more spaced apart or both than the columns in the Supreme Court. And that was like the first 15 minutes.
That was her description of the interview that she and Jonathan Swan had with Donald Trump for their book. And that interview was on, as she put it, the 17th day of Donald Trump's war in Iran, where he obviously didn't care much about that war, cared much more about the ballroom. Senator Sheldon Whitehouse was in the meeting today, as I just said, where the Trump supporters on the board of the Kennedy Center decided to name the area around the Kennedy Center the Donald J. Trump Plaza, a name that will be removed before long. And they think they've figured out a way to get Donald Trump's name engraved on the building, even after a federal judge ordered Donald Trump's name removed from the name of the Kennedy Center. Senator Whitehouse will join us later in this hour. And we have new disturbing news from Iran. Everything Donald Trump has said about when his war in Iran will end has been wrong or a deliberate lie. And now Iran is saying they might prolong the war through the rest of Donald Trump's presidency.
Is it Iran's objective to drag out this war, to maybe wait until Mr. Trump is out of office?
Look, we have to attain deterrence so that the enemy never dares to attack us, so we can live with security. One way is to prolong this war until we get to the next term of the presidency and cause attrition, so that if anyone else wants to attack Iran, they will know there is a cost.
So there's Iran's Revolutionary Guard saying they might choose to continue fighting Donald Trump for the rest of his presidency. No one has been more interested in Donald Trump's predictions, which turned out to be false, of when the war would end than the American military personnel fighting that war for Donald Trump. Imagine what it's like to be on an aircraft carrier in the longest deployment in the history of the United States Navy, with the commander-in-chief saying repeatedly for months that the war would be over in a matter of days, and each time that turns out to be false. Members of Congress are now demanding information about conditions on the aircraft carrier Abraham Lincoln. MS Now's Priya Sridhar has exclusive reporting about a sailor who jumped off the USS Lincoln last week, and she shared that reporting with Ari Melber this evening.
This is a heartbreaking story. I exclusively spoke with a 19-year-old woman who is the spouse of a sailor who jumped off the USS Lincoln last Monday. She tells me that she was growing increasingly worried about some of the text messages that her husband had been sending her, expressing to her how exhausted he was working as an aircraft mechanic on that aircraft carrier's flight deck, and basically saying that he was hopeless because his deployment had been indefinitely extended. And she actually discovered that he had jumped off the ship, and she told me that he was in the water for about an hour until he was rescued and taken to the medical team on the ship. And she discovered all of that from one of his squadron mates. She repeatedly reached out to the Navy for more information and didn't hear anything from them until 5 days later. He's now been medically evacuated from the ship. He was brought to the U.S. Navy base in Djibouti and is currently on his way back to San Diego. But Ari, this really shines a spotlight on how this ongoing war in Iran is taking a mental toll on arguably the military's most valuable resource, our service members.
The military newspaper Stars and Stripes has this report about the Lincoln. The aircraft carrier left San Diego in November for a Pacific deployment, was redirected to the Middle East, and has now been deployed for more than 8 months, including a record-breaking number of days at sea without a port stop. Interviews with active duty sailors and family members, along with dozens of public social media comments and posts by crew members, describe sailors struggling with exhaustion and declining morale, including reports of suicidal thoughts and at least one instance where a crew member was prevented from jumping overboard. Stars and Stripes agreed to withhold the identities of spouses, family members, and active duty sailors interviewed for this story due to fears of reprisal. Family members and sailors say the roughly 5,000 service members aboard Lincoln have endured food and water shortages, disrupted mail service, and long work days with little time off. Lincoln has gone much of the deployment without the regular port calls that typically give carrier crews a break from life at sea. Carriers generally pull into a port every 30 to 45 days to allow for replenishment, maintenance, and crew rest. We've just been turning and burning the whole time we've deployed, said one sailor, noting that crew morale was high at the beginning of deployment, with expectations of port visits and other breaks. Nothing to really look forward to at this point, the sailor said, adding that crew morale now is so low that sailors and Marines aboard Lincoln would be willing to forego any upcoming stops in favor of returning home as soon as possible. All we want is a date home. Sailors aboard Lincoln separately described an incident in which a crew member was prevented from jumping from the ship. We already had an instance where watchstanders had to stop someone from jumping, one sailor said. The ship's crew was informed about the incident, which occurred a few months ago during a ship-wide announcement, sailors said. A Navy spokesperson said in a statement today, "We have not observed an increase in suicidal ideations aboard the ship. We take every service member's well-being seriously and have medical and mental health professionals available to assess and address concerns as they arise. Our medical professionals continually monitor for trends to ensure issues are identified and addressed early to protect patient privacy. We will not discuss individual service members or their medical information." Senator Richard Blumenthal, whose state of Connecticut includes an important submarine base, is demanding more information from Donald Trump's defense secretary, Pete Hegseth, saying the Lincoln's extended deployment raises broader questions about the Navy's ability to sustainably generate carrier forces while preserving service member well-being, maintenance schedules, fleet readiness, and the capacity to respond to future contingencies. There have been widespread reports of shortages of basic supplies, water contamination, plumbing issues, deteriorating mental health, deck safety concerns, and disruptions in the mail system, which have caused many care packages en route to the ship to be lost in transit for months. These reports warrant immediate attention, but they also raise a broader question whether the Navy can sustain the operational tempo now being demanded of its carrier force, particularly as this administration repeatedly commits U.S. forces to conflicts of its own choosing and increasingly relies on aircraft carriers to sustain those operations. The aircraft carrier George Washington, which is based in Japan, will now be sent to replace the Abraham Lincoln in Donald Trump's war. The Wall Street Journal reports the Washington's movement to the Middle East will leave a temporary void in the Pacific, where China has deployed its own aircraft carrier and is seeking to exert influence over its neighbors, analysts say. The carrier rotation also is raising concerns about the Navy's ability to respond to global events and sustain its operations long-term, officials and analysts say. The Navy has 11 active aircraft carriers which require maintenance when they return home. Due to the Iran war, it could take 3 years to get the fleet back to its ideal readiness posture, according to Clark. If you've got 2 or 3 carriers on each coast that are in various stages of needing to be repaired or maintained, they're going to be waiting in line. The United States Navy knows that they do not control the Strait of Hormuz, even though their commander-in-chief tells the lie almost every day that they do. A spokesperson for Iran's Central Military Command said the baseless claims made by the United States regarding the normal passage of vessels through the Strait of Hormuz are nothing more than lies and falsehoods. Imagine serving in the United States Navy in this war and hearing the other side accuse the commander-in-chief of lies and falsehoods and knowing that that's right. That's how out of control Donald Trump is. That's how out of control Donald Trump's war is tonight. Leading off our discussion is Democratic Congressman Chris Deluzio of Pennsylvania. He's a member of the House Armed Services Committee and a Navy veteran. Congressman Deluzio, since you're a graduate of the Naval Academy, you've deployed on ships in the region. What is your reaction to this reporting we're getting about what's happening on the Lincoln?
It's just horrible stuff, Lawrence. I mean, these are brave Americans who want to serve, and we have the best sailors and the best Navy in the world. Yet you just read through those reports, horrible conditions, and they went to sea without port visits longer than any Americans in our Navy in modern history. More than 200 days without a port visit is just brutal stuff under any conditions. And remember, they were supporting combat operations, launching and receiving aircraft, doing that around the clock, standing watch, so much more. I mean, it is a lot these sailors are under. And the reports now, they're heartbreaking. And it, to me, number one, gets to the oversight that we have to do in the Congress about the condition for our sailors and Marines. And more importantly, who was asking questions in Donald Trump's inner orbit before they decided to start this war? The Republicans in Congress who cheerleaded this war. Did you think through what would happen when you extended a carrier this long, when you pulled a carrier out of the Pacific, leaving a void for China to fill? These are basic questions you should have asked before you started this war.
So all of those sources to Stars and Stripes, which is a highly credible military reporting newspaper, all of those sources, family sources, actual members of the Navy serving on the Lincoln and other ships, are all anonymous sources because, as the Stars and Stripes points out, they all live in fear of reprisal. So if you are married to someone on the Lincoln or one of these ships and you're talking to Stars and Stripes, you have to be fearful that there would be some sort of retribution from Donald Trump if your name appeared there. What does that do to the morale and the cohesion of everyone in this service?
And it's terrible for morale, the fact that there is, frankly, legitimate fear that Donald Trump and Pete Hegseth and people around them will punish the sailors and the Marines because their families are asking tough questions about the conditions they're in, because they may go to a member of Congress in an office like mine or any others to ask what's going on with my wife, my husband, my son, my daughter, who's a patriot, who is serving, who is doing their duty downrange in harm's way. It's a breaking of faith. And to me, again, it comes back to the profound and substantial responsibility we have in the Congress to find out what is happening, to demand that questions are answered, to make sure that the patriotism of our sailors and Marines is not squandered by incompetence from Pete Hegseth and others.
You know, anyone who's been around boats and ships knows that things that we take for granted on land, like plumbing, are not simple. You're not just flushing something down a pipe that disappears into an urban system. These reports about sanitary conditions on an aircraft carrier, water supply issues on an aircraft carrier, food supply issues on an aircraft carrier. How is it possible that the modern Navy would be struggling with issues like this?
Well, remember, an aircraft carrier is a small city, thousands of personnel on board, and they're sustaining combat operations, launching aircraft, receiving aircraft, rearming them, taking underway replenishment, that's receiving supplies at sea in contested environments, perhaps, where there's a threat from the Iranians, and doing all that, again, without having the regular tempo of a port visit to take on supplies, to manage larger repairs. That's the stress that's put on this crew. That's the stress that's put on these carriers. And it will be a thing that we will see in our fleet, I fear, for a long time, because the extra time it will take to repair the Lincoln, to get what needs to be done so that it's ready to go in its next deployment down the road, will drag on, take longer, and put an additional burden, I suspect, on other carriers. This is something that we will feel in our Navy's readiness for a long time.
In peacetime, when you go to sea, there's a rough idea, certainly, of when you'll be back, when you're waving goodbye to your family in San Diego. And sometimes there's a date certain of when you'll be back, and including important dates like, Dad's definitely going to be home for Christmas, or, Mom's definitely going to be home for Thanksgiving. What is it like to serve in a situation like this, where, as we heard from someone on that ship, all we want is a date home?
Yeah. Look, it's never easy to be deployed, to be away from family. The mission and the camaraderie sustains you. But you'd expect that your commander-in-chief, your Secretary of Defense, had thought through who will replace you in the fight. I cannot imagine that Franklin Roosevelt and Harry Truman, managing World War II, didn't have a plan to replace aircraft carriers and how long folks would be on station, whether they would get rest and relaxation, whether they have time in port, how you'd cycle through the cruise. This is basic stuff. And again, I just come back to this, Lawrence. When this started, when guys like me were saying, pump the brakes, why are you starting this war? I had to listen to Republicans tell me it's not a war. I had to listen to Pete Hegseth shortly after starting this war tell us that they had made the Iranian military combat ineffective. And yet here we are 6 months on. People are paying for this at the gas pump all over Pennsylvania, all over the country. And we have seen Americans come home in flag-draped caskets. We have seen hundreds wounded. This war has been a disaster. And it's not because of a lack of bravery or patriotism of our troops. It is because of Donald Trump and his Pentagon under Pete Hegseth.
And now we have the Iranian regime saying we might just want to keep this war going just enough all the way to the end of Donald Trump's presidency. That is what the Iranian revolutionaries did during Jimmy Carter's presidency. They kept that standoff going right to the end of his presidency.
Well, and again, I come back to this. You should not have started this war if you could not expect that this would be the outcome. The American people never supported this war. They were never even asked for their support. And now you are sending Americans now for months into harm's way, and we're dealing with the consequences of that right here at home. I've been all over Pennsylvania. I will tell you, Lawrence, folks are mad about the price of gasoline. They are mad about the consequences of this war in terms of lives, in terms of the dollars that it's costing us and the billions they are spending for this war. They want us to bring our troops home, put an end to this Iran war.
Navy veteran now, Congressman Chris Deluzio, thank you very much for starting off our coverage tonight.
Thank you, Lawrence.
Coming up, Donald Trump, the vandal in chief, wants more of your tax money to pay for his vandalism. That's next. New exclusive reporting by The Washington Post has tracked the rising costs of Donald Trump's unauthorized ballroom spending to over $900 million. The Washington Post reviewed confidential contracts and other sources to report the Trump administration plans to spend at least $900 million for construction projects on the White House grounds, a significantly larger price tag than has been previously reported, and one that would be covered primarily by taxpayers, according to records reviewed by The Washington Post. Instead of securing money directly from Congress, the records show the administration has pieced together funding from other agencies and private donors and directed it to a little-known account that typically holds a few $1 million for routine maintenance of the executive mansion. Confidential contracts and related planning documents indicate that the administration plans to use money in that account for White House modernization projects, the administration's term for President Donald Trump's planned overhaul of the property, at the center of which is a gilded East Wing ballroom. Together, the records reveal in the greatest detail yet how the Trump administration has sidestepped Congress. The exclusive reporting by The Washington Post reveals an important new detail about the contracts that have been issued to construct Donald Trump's ballroom. The Post reports the contracts reviewed by the Post leave open the possibility that the work will not move forward as planned and that the money will not be spent. Joining us now is Washington Post investigative reporter Sarah Blasky, who co-authored that report. And Sarah, I just want to begin with that last line about the contracts that you reviewed. They leave open the possibility that the work will not move forward as planned and that the money will not be spent. So apparently some people are paying attention to what's happening in these court cases.
So these contracts are a particular type of contract that allows the administration to issue work orders little by little over time. And that allows them to do parts of projects, start the East Wing ballroom, then move on to the helipad without committing to the whole overhaul all at once. And so that's what we mean when we say that these contracts allow them to do this bit by bit. They do not obligate all $900 million all at once. What we've seen is that they have agreed to spend, or they've obligated about $100 million out of that account that you were mentioning before, as of June of this year. However, these documents make clear that they intend to go through with multiple projects, at the center of which is this ballroom, but there's also a visitor screening facility to help Secret Service screen visitors to the White House. There's a helipad featuring the presidential seal. There's the work on the Rose Garden, the West Wing, Lafayette Park, and it goes on. All of this is that modernization project, and they certainly appear to intend to go through with all of it, although they are not contractually bound to.
And so, as the project goes forward, then how do the contractors plan what they're going to be doing if what they have are, in effect, kind of incomplete contracts for what the project is?
The planning documents make clear that the contractors expect to do this work. And so I think that's the important thing to note, is that while the White House is not contractually bound, they haven't said, yes, we have this money and we are going to spend this money. They're certainly in discussions with the contractors and in planning meetings where everyone is on the same page that this work is going to move forward. And there are schedules and construction completion dates that have been prepared on all sides.
And it seems like this is a very flexible budget. It's already gone to $900 million, and they haven't really started building the ballroom.
Well, that's right. And the $900 million does include the ballroom, the estimated $600 million for the construction of the ballroom, but then, of course, all these other projects as well. This price tag could go up. There are people and experts who have looked at it who expect it to go up. I think the important thing to note here is something else you mentioned earlier, which is they've started piecing together the funding for this. So you need a contract, and then you also need the money in order to have a project like this go forward. Congress generally in the past has appropriated the money for White House repair projects. In this case, that's not what they did. They went to other agencies, money, basically, feeling around in the proverbial couch cushions for funding from various places. That would be U.S. Secret Service. That would be the White House Military Office had some funding, and they've been transferring those funds into this little-known account for the better part of a year at this point. There is, of course, also at least $300 million coming from donors by way of the National Park Service.
Washington Post reporter Sarah Blasky, thank you very much for your important reporting and for joining us tonight.
Thank you.
Coming up, the board of the Kennedy Center thinks they've found a way to get Donald Trump's name on the building. Senator Sheldon Whitehouse was in that board meeting today trying to stop the Trump majority on the board, and he will join us next. The United States Senate was only 30 years old when they decided in 1819 to create the Senate Committee on Public Buildings. And that meant from 1819 until now, virtually every building built by the federal government, be it a one-room post office in the middle of nowhere or a modern federal office tower, had to be authorized by the Public Buildings Committee, which in 1947 changed its name to the Public Works Committee because the committee had jurisdiction by then over virtually everything the federal government built, which eventually came to include the interstate highway system and a whole range of projects that were not just buildings. In 1977, when the environment had finally become a serious area of concern at the highest level of government, the Senate decided to expand the Public Works Committee to what is now called the Committee on Environment and Public Works. And that committee still has jurisdiction over the construction or alteration or demolition of every federal building. Senator Sheldon Whitehouse is the top Democrat on the Committee on Environment and Public Works, which means he will become chairman of that committee next year if Democrats win control of the Senate. Senator Whitehouse's senior position on the Environment and Public Works Committee makes him a member by law of the Kennedy Center Board of Trustees. And that means that Senator Whitehouse was one of the votes against Donald Trump today in the board meeting in which a majority of the members chosen by Donald Trump voted to close the Kennedy Center for 2 years and to inscribe Donald Trump's name on the building after a federal judge ordered Donald Trump's name taken off the Kennedy Center, which Donald Trump illegally tried to change to the Donald J. Trump and the John F. Kennedy Memorial Center for the Performing Arts. Joining us now is Senator Sheldon Whitehouse of Rhode Island. He serves on the Senate Judiciary Committee and the Senate Finance Committee, in addition to the Environment and Public Works Committee. Senator, they figured out a way to get Donald Trump's name on the building. What is that going to be?
Well, they think they have, but there was no legal opinion providing any support for the notion that this resolution that they voted on would pass muster with the judge who already decided that nobody's name is allowed to go onto that building other than President John F. Kennedy by law. That's in the statute that created the Kennedy Center. So in these meetings, you sort of step into a bit of a odd fairyland in which a resolution comes forward. In this case, it was not on the agenda. No one was given prior notice. And suddenly there is a vote. As I said, no legal opinion to show that we're not doing another illegal vote on the same subject. So they kind of live in a fairyland of irresponsibility where things like complying with court orders don't matter. We voted also, we didn't vote, we had a meeting, a briefing on litigation, the litigation report. And the litigation report omitted that a judge has assessed a $250,000 attorney's fees award against the Kennedy Center that the trustees are going to have to pay for an ill-conceived lawsuit that failed, and the terrible job that the lawyers did of litigating it to the point where the judge awarded attorney's fees against the center. No mention of that until I brought it up. And to connect your two stories tonight, Donald Trump jumped on the call and went on about the ballroom, how it is under budget, ahead of schedule, going to be entirely paid for by big corporations with no mention of the federal court order out of the DC circuit, saying that he has no right to build the ballroom, that the American people own the White House, that Congress is the landlord, and that he is the four-year tenant. And like any four-year tenant, he doesn't get to go knock down a wing of the landlord's building. So it's a very, very strange atmosphere in these meetings.
So this is breaking news here. Donald Trump, who is a member of the Kennedy Center board, actually was in this meeting today where they, at some point, voted, the Trump members, which include people like Maria Bartiromo and Laura Ingraham, they actually voted to put his name on there, saying that he had somehow saved the Kennedy Center.
Yeah, that's part of the fairyland narrative, that he came swooping in, saved the Kennedy Center, that the congressional appropriation that was set aside for the improvements that are needed was only because of the magic of Donald Trump, and that therefore he should have his name on the building. And their scheme was, it's going to be called the John F. Kennedy Center for the Performing Arts, that has been restored and rehabilitated by Donald Trump, and then call the whole plaza that it's on the Donald Trump Plaza. Well, the whole thing is the Kennedy Memorial. And if you look at the statute, it's pretty clear that that's illegal. I think that's a bit of a tell when they didn't bother to give the board members a legal opinion by counsel saying that, yeah, you should vote for this because it complies with the statute. That, and then they voted to close the place for 2 years. On that, we got 2 days of 150 pages of technical specifications about the building itself to review for a 2-year closure, and no pro forma of what the financials would look like during the 2-year period. The most basic responsibility of a board is to understand what their decisions mean for the finances and the solvency of the institution for which they are trustees. And there's no pro forma And I asked for one, and they just went ahead and voted.
Did you get a chance to ask Donald Trump any questions about this?
No, he came on. He said he had been listening. He gave the speech for several minutes, and then he hung up. His vote and his chief of staff, Susie Wiles's vote, were texted in on these things. He did not vote in person.
But Donald Trump did vote for his name to go on to the building and for the plaza around it to be called the Donald Trump Plaza.
Correct. And it was quite a long meeting. It was about 2 hours. He said he'd been on for most or all of it, which is interesting because you've got an economy in collapse. Mm-hmm. You have massive cost increases on Americans that are driving people crazy. You've got a war in Iran where he's floundering, if not losing. And he's got 2 hours to spend on a vanity project about getting his name onto a building. It's a little odd that he wouldn't take the big problems more seriously and spend his time on them.
Yeah, it sounds like he wasn't trying to solve his aircraft carrier problems today. Senator Whitehouse, could you please stay with us? We're going to squeeze in a commercial break here. Sure. And when we come back, I want to get into more, since your position where you have jurisdiction over federal buildings, what Donald Trump's doing with that ballroom. We'll be right back with Senator Sheldon Whitehouse. The breaking news of this hour is that we have just learned from Senator Sheldon Whitehouse that Donald Trump participated in the trustees meeting of the board of the Kennedy Center, and that Donald Trump personally voted to rename the plaza, the area around the Kennedy Center, as the Donald J. Trump Plaza, and he voted to have his own name inscribed on the building, saying that he renovated the building. And we know this because Senator Sheldon Whitehouse is also a member of that board by law, and he was in that meeting today and just reported this to us. Senator Whitehouse, thank you very much for this information that was not in any of the press accounts about what happened in this meeting today. But you also told us that Donald Trump spent his time when he was, in effect, phoning into the meeting, talking about the ballroom. Did he talk about the ballroom more than the Kennedy Center?
I would say it was about even. I mean, this is a Kennedy Center board meeting, and he spent a lot of his time, if not most of it, talking about the ballroom. And in the Fantasyland, Fairyland world of these board meetings, his pitch was that it's under budget, it's had a schedule, no taxpayer money. And of course, we know from a lot of reporting and from official papers that, in fact, a lot of taxpayer money is being diverted to pay for the ballroom. And not only is it not ahead of schedule, it stopped dead in the water by a federal court of appeals, which upheld a judge's decision saying, you don't get to do this. You're the occupant of the building. Congress controls the building, and you can't tear down a wing of it and rebuild something new any more than you could a private landlord if you were the tenant of their home. So he really is very kind of out of touch with what we know to be true about his signature project between the Kennedy Center, the ballroom, the reflecting pool. He seems to live in a world in which these are all great successes for him.
And you're using your position on the Senate committee with jurisdiction over federal buildings to demand from the Government Accountability Office everything they know about the ballroom. And again, is something that would normally and legally have to go through your committee to be authorized before the Senate as a full body would even vote on it. They wouldn't consider something like this that hadn't passed through your committee.
Yeah, and anybody listening who has a home renovation project, you would want to know what the budget for the project was. You'd want a schedule, a timeline. How long is the contractor going to be in? What kind of a check am I going to have to write at the end of the day? Where is the money going to come from? Those are all really obvious questions that we can't get answers to. So we're asking the GAO, Leader Schumer, Budget Chairman Merkley, myself, and others are asking the accountants to go and get these answers that should have been the first pitch from the Trump administration. Here's what we're going to do. We need your blessing because of the law, but we also want you to understand that we can manage this project. Here's what the budget's going to be. We'll stick to it. Here's what the schedule's going to be. We'll stick to it. None of that has come to pass. The whole thing is just ramshackle and is now tangled up in litigation because they didn't do it right.
So on a day when we have credible reporting about a sailor on the USS Lincoln jumping overboard, being driven to that point, this is what Donald Trump is thinking about.
Yeah, conditions on the Lincoln have been terrible. Before that, conditions on the Ford were very challenging. And they're running out these very lengthy deployments that are putting immense stress on the personnel. And they don't seem to have a single care about it. And here's the president of the United States spending all his time with ballrooms, botched reflecting pools, his own U.S. attorney's word, and the tangle about the Kennedy Center and getting his gilded name back up on it again. It just seems that the priorities are very different from the concerns of the American people and very different from what our soldiers, sailors, Marines, and airmen have a right to expect.
Senator Sheldon Whitehouse, thank you very much for joining us tonight.
Thank you.
We'll be right back. Senator Sheldon Whitehouse gets tonight's last word.